You're watching the Stories That Scare channel. There is no turning back now.
3 true street takeover horror stories that will make you leave the car meet early.
Hey everybody, I'm glad y'all stopped by. Over the last few years, you've probably seen videos online of what's known as street takeovers. Sometimes they're called sideshows, teen takeovers, or simply car meets. A large group of drivers gathers in the middle of the night. They block off an intersection, form a circle, and watch as drivers perform donuts, burnouts, and other stunts, while hundreds of spectators stand just a few feet away. To some people, they're dangerous, illegal, and completely reckless. To others, they're simply a modern version of what street racing was decades ago, a place where car enthusiasts gather, show off their builds, and chase the adrenaline. Whatever your opinion, one thing is certain. Once the smoke fills the intersection, and the crowd surround the cars, it's surprisingly easy for someone or something to go unnoticed. I started searching online for stories from people who claim they experienced something they still can't explain at these late-night gatherings. Whether these stories are true, or just another piece of urban legend, I'll let y'all decide. All right, let's get into the first one. This first story was shared by a guy who regularly attended street takeovers around Houston, Texas. Here's what he had to say. Back in 2023, almost every Saturday night, a group of us would meet around midnight. Nobody posted the location publicly. Someone would drop a pin in a private group chat about 30 minutes beforehand. Within an hour, a couple hundred cars would show up. Imports, muscle cars, lifted trucks, even motorcycles. The moment everyone arrived, the intersection transformed. People parked in every direction. Music blasted from open trunks. The smell of burnt rubber mixed with gasoline. Someone always climbed onto the roof of their car to record. Others held fireworks. The police would eventually show up, so everyone knew the night wouldn't last forever. That was part of the excitement. One night, we took over an intersection in an industrial area. There weren't any businesses nearby, just warehouses, shipping containers, and empty railroad tracks. Everything felt normal. Drivers were doing donuts, people were cheering. Phones filled the air. Then, a black Foxbody Mustang slowly rolled into the circle. It looked immaculate, gloss black paint, chrome wheels, dark-tinted windows. Not a scratch on it. Nobody recognized the car, which was strange. Most of us knew each other's builds. The crowd made room. The Mustang revved its engine once. The sound didn't seem right. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was deep, like it echoed from somewhere underground. The driver eased into the intersection, then started spinning perfect circles. Not fast, not slow. Perfect. The tires weren't smoking. They weren't squealing. Yet somehow, the car kept sliding effortlessly across the pavement. Everyone stopped watching the other cars. Every phone turned toward the Mustang. For almost 2 minutes, it never made a mistake. Not once. Then, as it passed directly in front of me, the headlights swept across the crowd. For just a second, I could see through the driver's side window. There wasn't anyone behind the wheel, just an empty driver's seat. The steering wheel was turning by itself. I blinked, certain I'd imagined it. Then the Mustang completed one more circle, and every streetlight around the intersection went out at the exact same time. The intersection disappeared into darkness. Not completely. The headlights from hundreds of parked cars still lit the smoke. But every streetlight, every traffic signal, every parking lot lamp went black. People started yelling. Some laughed, thinking someone had cut the power. Others pulled out their phones to keep recording. The Mustang never stopped spinning. Its headlights cut through the smoke like 2 white knives. Round after round after round. Then, someone beside me shouted, "Where'd everybody go?" I looked toward the middle of the intersection. The crowd that had been standing only a few feet from the car had vanished. At least, that's what it looked like. The smoke had become so thick, you couldn't see more than 20 feet. The cheering stopped, the music stopped, even the engines went silent. The only sound left was that Mustang, its engine droning in a slow, steady rhythm. Then the headlights disappeared. The car was still moving. You could hear it. But you couldn't see it anymore. That's when panic set in. People started running, some jumped into their cars. Others shoved through the crowd trying to get away. I pulled up my phone, switched on the flashlight, and started walking toward where I'd last seen the Mustang. Someone grabbed my arm. "Dude, don't." It was one of my friends. His face looked pale. He pointed toward the pavement. Fresh black tire marks covered the intersection. Perfect circles, one inside another, dozens of them. But they all shared one strange detail. Every burnout mark passed directly through the people standing there, through parked cars, through concrete barriers. As if nothing in the intersection had ever been an obstacle. Then, the streetlights suddenly flickered back on. The smoke began to clear. The Mustang was gone. No one saw it leave. No one heard it drive away. It had simply disappeared. Police arrived less than 2 minutes later. Most of the crowd scattered. The rest of us stayed long enough to answer a few questions. One officer walked over to the tire marks. He stared at them for a long moment, then quietly asked, "Who was driving the black Foxbody?" Nobody answered. "Finally," I said, "I don't think anyone was." He looked at me, then looked back at the circles burned into the pavement. Without saying another word, he shook his head. As everyone started leaving, an older man stepped out from one of the nearby warehouses. He watched the intersection in complete silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Y'all picked the wrong intersection." I asked him what he meant. He pointed toward the railroad tracks. "There used to be a street race here, long before these takeovers." Kid lost control of his Mustang and never made it home. He looked down at the tire marks. They say, every now and then, he comes back, looking for one more race. Maybe not every car that shows up to a street takeover belongs to someone who's still alive. All right, let's move on to story number 2. This next story was shared by a guy who filmed street takeovers for social media. If you've ever watched those videos, you know everyone wants the perfect angle, the closest shot, the biggest burnout, the moment everyone else misses. Sometimes, the camera captures more than you realize. Here's what he had to say. "I wasn't one of the drivers. I was the guy behind the camera. Every weekend I'd bounce between different takeovers around Dallas and Fort Worth. I'd post the videos online. Slow-motion donuts, flames shooting from exhausts, cars nearly clipping spectators. People loved it. One Saturday, someone dropped a location in our group chat. An abandoned shopping center, huge intersection, perfect for a takeover. By the time I arrived, there had to be 500 people there. Smoke filled the air. Music echoed off the empty buildings. The smell of burnt rubber hung so thick, your eyes burned after a few minutes. I climbed onto the roof of an abandoned bus stop. It gave me the perfect view of the intersection. One by one, cars entered the circle. A red Camaro, a silver Nissan 350Z, a blue Charger. I filmed everything. Then, an old white Chevrolet Caprice rolled into the intersection. It looked completely out of place. No fancy wheels, no loud exhaust, no modifications, just an old sedan. People actually started laughing. Someone yelled, "Grandpa's here!" The Caprice stopped in the middle of the intersection. Its headlights shut off. The engine died. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the horn blasted. One long, unbroken note. Everyone covered their ears. The headlights suddenly came back on. Only now, they weren't white. They glowed a dull yellow. The Caprice slowly started moving, not spinning donuts, not racing, just circling the intersection. Every person standing near it stepped backward. Without realizing why, I kept filming. The camera zoomed in automatically as the car came closer. The windshield was filthy, covered in streaks, but I could still make out the driver. An elderly man, gray hair, both hands gripping the steering wheel. He never blinked, never looked at the crowd. He just stared straight ahead, as if nobody else existed. Then the Caprice passed directly beneath me. For just a second, I looked away from my camera and down at the car itself. There wasn't anyone inside. The driver's seat was empty. I looked back at my camera screen. The old man was still sitting there, perfectly visible. I lowered the camera again. Empty, raised it. The old man lowered it. Empty, raised it. still there. Then every car alarm in the parking lot went off at exactly the same time. Maybe some things can only be seen through the lens. We've got one last story, and this final one is the reason I stopped going to street takeovers altogether. This last story was shared by a police officer who worked the overnight patrol shift. Now, before anyone gets upset, this isn't about whether street takeovers are right or wrong. It's simply what one officer claims happened while responding to one. Here's what he had to say. I'd responded to dozens of street takeovers. By the time dispatch called one out, the crowd was usually already moving to the next location. You'd show up, find burnt rubber, broken glass, maybe a few shell casings, then clear the intersection. Pretty routine. One October night, around 2:20 a.m., dispatch reported a large takeover underneath an overpass. Over 300 vehicles. Intersection completely blocked. My partner and I were only a few minutes away. As we approached, we could already hear engines revving. Music, people cheering. It sounded exactly like every other takeover. Then we turned the corner. The intersection was empty, not a single car, no spectators, nothing. Just fresh tire marks covering every lane. My partner looked at the computer. You sure this is the right address? Dispatch immediately answered. Affirmative. We're receiving dozens of 911 calls. I stepped out of the patrol car. The air smelled like burnt rubber. Fresh, like the cars had left seconds earlier. Then, my body camera beeped. Recording activated. I hadn't touched it. Neither had my partner. At that exact moment, we heard it, an engine, somewhere beneath the overpass. Revving higher and higher, echoing through the concrete. We followed the sound, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Nobody. The engine suddenly stopped. Then, a woman's voice came over my shoulder. Move. I spun around. No one. My partner stared at me. What? You didn't hear that? Hear what? Before I could answer, dispatch came over the radio. Units, multiple callers reporting a vehicle doing donuts. What's your status? I looked around the intersection. It cleared before we got here. Dispatch paused, then quietly replied. Sir, the callers are describing your location. Right now, my stomach dropped, because we were standing completely alone. Then, one by one, fresh black tire marks began appearing on the pavement, right in front of us. No car, no smoke, no sound, just rubber burning itself into the asphalt. Perfect circles, growing larger and larger, until they surrounded us. My partner whispered, "Back to the car." We started walking, then running. The moment we shut the doors, every window in the patrol unit rattled. An engine screamed past us, close enough to shake the entire vehicle. But when I looked through the windshield, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The next morning, I reviewed my body camera footage. The video showed exactly what I'd remembered. An empty intersection, no cars, no people. But the audio was different. You could clearly hear hundreds of people cheering. Engines bouncing off the rev limiter. Tires screaming across pavement. Even someone yelling, "One more lap!" The camera never captured a single vehicle, only the sounds. Curious. I asked one of the older officers if he'd ever heard of anything like it. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened an old filing cabinet. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the early 1990s. A group of teenagers had been street racing beneath that very overpass. One driver lost control. The crash killed several spectators. The city eventually redesigned the intersection, but the races never really ended. To this day, whenever dispatch receives calls from that location after midnight, the first officer to answer usually says the same thing. There wasn't anybody there. But it sure sounded like there was. I still patrol that district, but if another takeover call comes in, for that intersection, I let someone else take it. Maybe some crowds never really go home. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know which one unsettled you the most, and if you've ever witnessed something strange at a car meet, street takeover, or late-night gathering. I'd love to read about it in the comments. Who knows? Your story might appear in a future episode. Until next time, keep the fires burning. And as always, I'll tell the stories, if you'll stay scared.